So, hi, my name is Yinka Esi Graves. I'm British flamenco dancer. I'm born in London, but from a very young age have moved around quite a bit. And I've always danced, really. I think I started dancing, my first dance class when I was about 4 or 5. But I didn't come to flamenco until I was like 21, when I was at university. And it sort of, in many ways, changed my life. It wasn't an experience of doing it and knowing that I wanted to become a flamenco dancer, but as I kind of started learning, I just had this huge sensation that I needed to learn more. And that desire, that kind of interest is really what took me to Spain, because I knew that to really understand it, I needed to go to Spain. So at the age of 20, nearly 24, I moved to Spain. That's now nearly 11 years ago. And it's been a kind of a long, but I'm still in the process, journey of kind of learning more about it and sort of slowly working towards becoming a professional dancer, taking the stage, and believing that I am a flamenco dancer, which is, it's a, in Spanish, the word is bailaora, it's not bailarina, bailarina is like ballet dancer or jazz or something, but bailaora is this huge word with like a lot of weight, and I rarely say that of myself. I feel like obviously I'm a flamenco dancer and I dialogue with flamenco, but I feel like there's still a way to go to be able to kind of carry that word.
Still a lot of significance that you have to carry and come across. Love that. Okay, so we're gonna start off with some questions. So the first one is, what inspired you to get into flamenco?
So yeah, the interesting thing is I don't know that there was a specific thing that inspired me to actually do it. I think it was the act of doing it. So I attended a class in England. I studied at Sussex University, and I saw that there was a class on, like any class, and I was like, and it wasn't to do with the courses at the university, it was just like in the town that I was living in, and I was like, I'd like to take that up.
Right.
Exactly. And so I went, and I kind of tried to go as regularly as possible, and I think I remember with my flatmates, like I would always practice and like really liked it, and I think that it was really the act of doing it, of actually being in the class and actually kind of learning the footwork and all these things, and watching my teacher, who I just remember I loved so much, that made me want to learn more. So it wasn't, some people see somebody and they're like, I want to be that person. It was never that. It was just always a sense from my body that I wanted to experience that. And I feel like these kind of like nearly 11 years in Spain have been a part of that. And this constant thing, despite loads of supposed reasons as to why I shouldn't, because obviously I'm not Spanish, I'm not, I'm a black woman, there are very few black flamenco dancers.
It's not very traditional.
Right, exactly. You don't often see, people like me doing that. So I've always had this sense of like, why am I doing it? However, I feel like my body, there's something in me, deeper in me, that's just
it was a natural calling.
It kept me going,
Yes. Okay. So what does the dance represent to you?
I think sometimes I'm asked that question, and I kind of feel like I always come back to this question of truth. I feel that there's something in flamenco that is really forces you to, one, really look at yourself. To reach a certain level, you have to do a lot of training. That means you're standing in front of the mirror, facing your limits every single day, and the actual performance of it is very difficult. There's so many different elements to it. You've really got to be listening to your musicians. So it's almost like the act of flamenco is greater than you as an individual, and that you're constantly fighting with that in a way. And so I think that's kind of like a value, which I feel that in so many things in the world we live in, it doesn't exist and isn't valuable. Everything's almost like what you can show, marketing yourself, blah, blah, blah. And I feel like flamenco is always going back to a sense of truth that you're trying to express, that you're trying to do. And that, I think that to me is like the biggest thing. And then obviously notions of community, because in a way, you know, you can't do this by yourself. Sometimes people ask me to dance to recorded music, and to me that's just not flamenco. Like, so I'm not interested in doing that unless I'm doing a piece where the music is recorded for some reason, but that's different. You know?
Of course. So you just like being a part of something that is much bigger than you, that actually matters and has more of a significance than you let yourself be.
Yes,
so,
yeah.
So the
that's
dance,
a nice way of seeing it.
Yeah. So the dance itself is representing something so much more significant. Love it. So, what do you hope others will gain by watching you perform?
Okay, that's an interesting question. I feel like, so this tour we've been doing here in the States alongside this film Gurumbe, Canciones de tu Memoria Negra, which speaks about the black presence in Spain and the influence that that population had in culture, in popular culture, and then down the line in the creation of what we now know as flamenco. I feel that to a certain extent I'm aware that as I take up different spaces on stage, you know, I've had the opportunity of performing in Spain, in France, in England, in Colombia, Panama, like the States, lots of different places, that people question that a little bit, and I really feel that it allows for a rethinking of the way we're told certain narratives. And so I think it feels almost like a privilege, but it's also something that I feel like if people can walk away, obviously connecting with what I'm doing, and hopefully that it's like, okay, first and foremost, you know, I enjoyed it, exactly, of course, but that at the same time that they sort of have other questions around that, even like, oh my gosh, how come she's doing that? And then just help to break some of the stereotypes we have, which we all have about different things. I feel like that's like a huge thing, you know.
To make people more open-minded. Gotcha. So, like, what specific stories do you try to tell with flamenco?
Yeah, interesting. I feel like flamenco is not necessarily a storytelling dance form, in that a lot of attempts to kind of bring in narrative I find are failed to a certain extent, because in a way I feel like flamenco contains so much of the kind of human experience. So a lot of, you know, flamenco, it's important to understand, is the name that's given to hundreds of what we call palos. They're different styles. So each style has a different kind of rhythmical, melodic, lyrical world. And on top of that, it's got sometimes not only a different aesthetic, but also a different kind of sensation, in the sense that, you know, you're dancing an alegrías, which is a kind of more festive, celebratory style, and then you're dancing a seguirías, which is positively tragic, to then a soleá, which is nostalgic, to, you know...
So it's mainly about themes, is what you're dancing.
Yeah, I feel like human experiences, you know, and a lot of the lyrics can go from love to loss to food to comedy, do you know what I mean? And so I think it contains so many things that it's almost like it's more about connecting with that. So for example, I've found it easier to connect with the kind of heavier styles like soleá. I love dancing soleá. And maybe, you know, as you exit, I often think that I'm kind of walking with a lot of people behind me, be they ancestors or whoever. And alegrías, which is often the palo that people start when they dance because it's supposedly simpler, I've never felt that I quite not understood, but felt ready to do it. And I would say that in the last few years, and I think because it's about celebrating who you are, I felt like legitimized to dance that palo. So I feel like for me it's more about accessing different realities of our experience, because they are varied, you know, and it's nice to tap into the different qualities that the palos offer in a way.
Right. Do you think this dance contributes into today's societal issues?
Interesting. I think,
and it doesn't just have to be from the United States. It could be, because you know you do travel a lot, so it could just be the world overall in today's issues.
So I would say that on the surface, perhaps it doesn't, in the sense that, you know, it's almost like there are sorts of cantes, there are sorts of lyrics that are now, let's say, 100 and something years old, that are standards that people reuse. So they're not necessarily, you know, talking about the war here, or, you know, human rights and so on and so forth, or specific human rights, because then, as we were saying before, within it there is so much wealth in terms of the human experience that it's almost like you can find different things within it to connect to things that are happening nowadays. And then specifically there are a few artists who are actively kind of speaking from a place of today. So people like Israel Galvan and Rocío Molina, Andrés Marín, who are dancers, who may, you know, they're seen as like contemporary flamenco dancers, but it's almost like they are they're presenting it in a non-sort of traditional form, and so therefore asking questions. Like Rocío Molina just had an amazing show called Caída del Cielo, which is a very womanist show where she's kind of dealing with like her sexuality, like menstruation, all these sorts of things, which is really interesting in that context. And then there's also, I know they had a festival last year, I think, where a lot of LGBT dancers put on a festival together, kind of speaking from that place. So that's quite new, and that's exciting. And I think the thing is that flamenco, everything fits into flamenco in a way. So I think it's almost more about the individuals, the artists.
And the way they want to portray it as.
Exactly.
Gotcha. All right. So, you said you dance flamenco. Do you anytime teach it? Or you do teach it as well?
Yeah, absolutely.
So which do you prefer, or why do both? If you don't prefer either one, then you could just go with I do both because...
Okay. Yeah, no, I love teaching. Teaching for me, I think I'm a better teacher than I am a dancer, or I trust my teaching more than I do my dancing. But my dancing is very important for me, so because I think they both feed each other. It's like, you know, if you're able to teach something, it almost allows you to understand it better. But I also know that a lot of the things that I'm now teaching are partly to do with lacks that I felt in my own learning, because my learning has been very unorthodox in a way, or it's just the way it is with flamenco, that to really connect with the flamenco that I'm interested in, it's about you choosing the people you learn with. So it's not a course that guarantees that after 5 years you will graduate as, you know, it's like it's a lifetime kind of journey, and that process is ongoing. And so I feel like I'm always going to be a student whilst I'm kind of continuing my career. And then my experience of teaching is sharing that knowledge and also applying it to, recently I was in Colombia doing a lot of workshops around the kind of rethinking flamenco as part of this expressions of the African diaspora in a way, particularly for communities, for Afro-Colombian communities who are almost sort of excluded from a lot of things. And flamenco in Latin America is often like portrayed as this like elitist Spanish thing, which excludes people who are not the direct clear descendants of the Spaniards in Latin America. And so it was very interesting to come from that place, but to connect with dancers. So for example, with Afro-Colombian dancers who were doing Afro-contemporary work, and being able to connect with them and also find, which is something I'd like to develop because I'm very much at the beginning of this, but find a common ground from which we can all work. So it's not only about a genre, but it's about ideas, concepts, and our bodies in a way, and rhythm as well.
That's why you mentioned earlier the flamenco just can really be relevant to everything.
Exactly. So I kind of see my work developing in those two realms, and I feel like they're both interdependent, and I'd really like to continue dialoguing with both, because I think they're both enriching, and I definitely know that with teaching, I know that flamenco is not just about me, for me, in a way.
Well, like we were saying, it's so much bigger than just that. Let's see, how far along were we? Alright, we're almost done. Anything else you want to contribute? Anything you want to put out there about flamenco?
What can I say? Well, I mean, maybe ask you, like, in terms of the course that you're doing, what does a character like me, like, what can I...
So right now, people have flamenco overall. Every time they think of flamenco, they think red dress,
right,
Hispanic or Latin woman. So how do you enjoy breaking those boundaries? How does that affect you with that stereotype? Like, how do you feel towards that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've always just had a sense of I'm just trying to be me doing this kind of thing. And I think the stereotype is there, and at the same time, I think it's just about, like, can we look beyond the stereotype? And I think anybody who engages with flamenco to a certain extent, ultimately you're going to want to connect with what's happening, as opposed to I need to see somebody in that aesthetic, no? And so I think there are things about how flamenco is presented which I think is very interesting, in the sense that there is a celebration of, like, the strength of women, this idea that you can really affirm your presence through, you know, absolute power, and almost play with femininity and masculinity. And so it's funny, because I think whilst there's that stereotype, there's actually something behind it which is actually so much more empowering, and I think that's really what I go to. And, you know, I don't think I engage much with the stereotype, simply because it's like, from the very beginning, obviously I'm a black woman, like, I know a lot of foreign flamenco dancers, because they're increasing more and more of us, who go through a process of changing their names so they sound more Spanish, or, you know, if somebody's fair haired, they'll dye their hair, or those sorts of things to fit the stereotype. But to a certain extent, that because I'm black, it's like there's no way I'm going to be doing that.
So you keep true to yourself.
Right, in the sense that it's like that's never been my battle, because it's like there's no... To me, that's just like, why would I even begin to do that, right? So it's almost connecting with other things in it beyond that. So,
like, you trust your talent, you trust your knowledge in flamenco, you trust that you'll be accepted, and so therefore when you have that confidence, then when you go for it, you're just like, oh my god, and you become an inspiration to many people. Well, I mean, that want to make a difference.
That's lovely to hear, but I feel like that's never been certain for me. That's almost like through over the years, you know, as I learn more, as I become more and more confident with what I'm doing, and I'm still very much in that process, that is. But I think that I've just had this force that's like, don't give up, don't give up, don't get up, but I've never known why. Do you know what I mean? Like, I haven't seen the end necessarily, and I've been very lucky, because the last few years I've had exposure in all sorts of different spaces, maybe because, and in a sense, I feel very happy that I've been able to access, because I maybe don't fit into the traditional notion, other spaces have opened to me. So, like, the Gibney Dance Centre, which is an amazing contemporary dance centre, invited me to perform through Nora Chibamire last year, and that was amazing, because I think that was the first time they had a flamenco performance there, and that's just wonderful. And I feel in many ways I'm almost engaging with new audiences, thanks to the fact that the traditional spaces aren't necessarily the ones where I am. So I'm kind of observing my career as it's happening. I would say that I didn't know at all what was going to happen. I didn't even think that I would become a professional dancer. It sort of happened. So yeah, I'm kind of intrigued to see what it'll all look like, you know, 10 years down the line.